Puneet, welcome and thank you for joining. Thank you for making the time. I'm sure there'll be other people as they join. We'll welcome. So just real quick, this I wanted to talk a little bit about background screening in the industry, what happens, just a primer. There are practitioners and people in the industry who are experts, and they are definitely people who know a lot more than I do. But this is what I'm sharing today is just based on my learning and my experience, over the last 10 years or so. So, and I'm really, this is all about just education and awareness and call it evangelism to the companies, to the individuals about the industry, what is background screening, especially today's session is more around the what and the why and the how and complexities and, how things are done. And more importantly, what is changing, what are customers demanding today. So it's a little bit about that. I think in future we will have different sessions talking about specific, issues, if you will. One is, the compliance, for example. Other is the turnaround time, and it could be international. So we'll pick up different topics to go over that, technology, and so on and so forth. So just moving on. And we will just take questions at the end. But I think it's only just you at the moment. So if you want to ask any questions, feel free to interrupt and stop, and I'll pause in between. So without further ado, I think it's more when we talk about, background screening, I think in general, before we even jump into that, it's just all about curiosity. I think it's, the reason I have these pictures here is, you're working with people, you want to know about them. You're meeting people, you want to know about them. Your neighbors, people you're dating, and your college teachers, school teachers, and so on. The products you buy. So imagine, I think it's a lot of people, when you ask them questions about background screening and so on and so forth, sometimes it's very hard. But if you ask them, what kind of research you do when you were buying a shoe, why did you buy a particular brand of shoe or a pair of headphones or certain produce or vegetables and so on. So needless to say, you would read the list of the ingredients on the package. You look at the the fat content and sodium and salt and so on, and likewise, when it comes to buying shoes or your phone or any smart device or headphones, you'd probably do some research about how good or bad they are and so on. So really, background screening is about getting to know the people, the individual, the people you're going to be working with, or the people you are going to trust them with your kids or your assets, your home, your property. From an employer perspective, from if you take an example, all around us during the day, as we deal with certain things we need or we have, whether it's your insurance, whether it's your mortgage, your car loan, all of these companies are actually doing and learning more about you with respect to your capability to make payments, with respect to your income, with respect to your background, and so on and so forth. So really, what is background screening? It's a mix, and it's really just putting together a plethora. I mean, and all of the information from plethora of sources, where they can get, and it starts with as simple as your identity verification, your legality, your ability to work in a certain country or locale or a region. And then it entails looking at what's your credential, the places or what things you claim in your background. your educational or your previous employment, because you know what, you get paid for your experience, your education. And so at the end of the day, the employees want to know that, the landlords want to know that, the banks want to know that. Um, the criminal history, they want to know, do you have, what kind of record do you have? Are you, maybe you were a dangerous person for the society or the workplace, and so on. If you were, if you were getting insurance, or you were looking for a job where had to drive for delivery, for example, then you would be looking at, what kind of driving record do you have? What's your behavior, your pattern? How many speeding tickets or DUI have you received? And if you fast forward today, there is a lot of information of social media, which actually gives, believe it or not, the digital footprint is permanent, and it reveals more than you think you would based on every post you make, every statement, every like, every picture, so on. So that social media tells a lot about your personality, about your background, your company, your friends, your beliefs, if you will, and thinking, and how it may impact the workplace or the culture, so on and so forth. So those things are important. So, and then in the middle, if you see, is the big dollar sign. I mean, it's really, it's about the money they spend, the money they're going to pay you, the money they're going to loan you. It's your capability to earn a job. It's about the money, whether you have filed a bankruptcy or not, what's your credit worthiness. So really just about, every aspect of our life for every individual at the end of the day is driven by, your background, and what you can or cannot do, and what you should or should not do, and so on and so forth. And how would other employers or landlords then look at you? um, it is also important. I mean, I think by this time we probably know that at the end of the day, it's really just about risk and safety. So whether it is the workplace, they're looking at what kind of risk are they entailing, how much safety measures do we have. It's not very uncommon to see you have badges when people walk into the office. They track you coming in, going out. You get into the car in Uber, the driver is background screened. You go for Airbnb, you and your landlord are, background screened, and so on. So it's really just about, the risk and safety of the workplace, of the individual, and the people, for you and for the people around you, and for the workplace, and so on. And regardless of the profession or the job you're looking. So that really is, background screening in a nutshell. It is about risk and safety. It's about collating all of the information they can from, thousands of data sources, from millions of records all over, to be able to pull something together which gives somebody insightful information and data for them to make a decision to hire people, or trust them with property, or give them with a huge loan, and so on. One can argue, do you really need background check? Because we see so much of happening around our world, with respect to whether it is the political arena, or whether it is in the other, that there are a lot of people with different kind of criminal background. It doesn't seem to impact, but at the end of the day, this is really needed. So background checks are needed. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions from anybody. And Christina, Tesa, you guys are welcome. Anybody else on the webinar, if you want to ask any questions? Okay. I
Good.
guess we'll keep moving. Sorry, somebody had something?
All good, all good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to anybody else who just joined recently, and if they have missed something, we will be sharing the recording. Uh, so why do we need to do background checks? I think, we're just taking a note or segue from the previous slide. It's about risk and safety. But in reality, I think there is a lot of fraud. There is a lot of a lot of people who do unethical things. There is a lot of people with suspicious, suspect background, and so on. And we all read about these things. The Tinders and background check is needed whether you're looking for a job, whether you're driving or delivering or driving somebody, whether it's in any profession, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, a minor league coach, a school teacher, anything. When you're going to be around kids, when you're going to be around other people. Um, when you are, for example, dealing with security, I mean, the classic example is we all travel, we all fly, and there is TSA screening in the US, and there is security personnel at every international airport around the world, or every airport around the world. And so they are all background screened. Even people who manage our money, people who are trusted to sort of work in facilities, even though it may be as little as they may be working in a janitorial position. So all kinds of jobs, and then in our personal lives, whether you're dating or not. I think I put the Tindler Swindler on there because it's a classic show which talks about how innocent, unsuspecting, people get conned into, dating some people, and then they lose their livelihood, and it's very sad, but this happens because there is these kind of people which are there, and you could lose a lot of money. So your credit worthiness, and so to get all this, you do need to perform background checks. We have a number. I have a number there, 1/3 over there. So I don't know if anybody can guess what that is, but in according to NCSL, yeah, there is a link on the slide. It's an astounding number, which is 1/3 of every American, almost 77 million people have some kind of criminal record or in their background. And it could be a simple felony, it could be a misdemeanor, it could be some kind of arrest or incarceration, but that is a huge, and that's a scary number. And this is, we are, maybe unfortunately focusing and talking a little bit about the US market, but then again, this is the largest market, the largest industry, if you will, or the largest market for this industry. But that is critical. Having said that, maybe that number is about the same or a little higher or a little less in terms of the percentage of population in some other parts of the world. Maybe some other countries don't even track and report this data, but that in itself is an astounding number and compelling enough to be able to, force people to look at why background screening should be done. Okay, just moving along. Just cautious of time here. We want to wrap this up in about another 15 minutes, leaving 5 minutes for Q&A. I thought it was important to talk a little bit about how our background checks done, and the reason this is important is because in sort of coming again from personal experience, in my interaction with clients or with individuals. And in many cases, the legal counsel of our clients, because many of their customers are asking, do you do background checks? Very recently, I had somebody reach out to me and said, hey, we are going through a SOC 2 audit. We need this. Can you help us? And so on and so forth. So I think it is important to understand how our background checks done. And again, this is coming from a, let's just say, US perspective, but it is no different whenever you go around the world. It's very similar. The data sources may be very different. The kind of information or the extent of information available or can be reported could be very different. But in broadly speaking, uh, this is quite similar across the globe. There are international challenges, however, but having said that, it's still with a broad brush. it's more or less the same kind of background check. There are two numbers or three numbers in here, 800 million plus and 1,000 plus. I don't know if anybody wants ventures to guess what those are, but this is just to kind of illustrate the complexity, the depth, and the breadth of information. So there is about 1,000 plus data sources which are used or available or accessed by different providers, different partners. Working across 800 million plus. In all honesty, that number might actually be more than 1 billion or 2 billion, because when you look at traversing through all the identity information, all the criminal information, all of the driving information, bankruptcy, financial, and so on, sanctions, you're actually going through billions of records essentially. So just wanted to kind of lay it out there and say, it is a complex process. It's not trivial. Fortunately, it's a lot of databases are available and the process is automated, so it can be done faster. But then moving along, I think the way background checks is done is really at the center of the universe is the individual. It's you and I. We have to provide an information. We fill out lengthy forms when we apply for a job or when we get hired. You fill out all kinds of forms when we apply for a loan, or we fill out a rental application. And as you can see, it starts with just verifying who am I or who are you. It's important to get that information, and with social security number, or for other countries it could be national ID, it could be an Aadhaar or a PAN card, for example, in India. So there are different numbers which are used as a starting point. There are multiple ways which can be done. There are ways where you take a selfie and that you upload your passport or your driver's license, and that verifies the identity. But that's just verifying that the person who took the picture, that's you, and the person in the document is the same person. That's only a part of it. The other critical part is the ID, which is actually driven by this national ID or social security number, which gives you the authority to work. It gives you the ability to provide a lot of information. More importantly, this is your key, or the key for the employers, other people, to learn everything about you at the end of the day. So that gives the trace, that gives your address history, that gives your credit history, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot which can be unraveled just by this one magic number. The second picture is, wish it was a larger picture, but you can see, for example, and again, this is just to illustrate the complexity and the vastness of the search which is done, is the picture of the US. And you could probably see, if you look closely, boxes in there and then number below. Not many people even know that we have 3,144 counties. And we are counting, because there are new counties which keep coming up as the development happens, as the zoning happens every year or every few years, the number of counties could grow. Guess what? Every county, there is a county code, whether it's for criminal or civil and so on. So when you hire people, there is complexity of getting county records, because though that is the source, the authentic source for criminal records. So the good news is some counties are online. They have digital access, and whether it's a human or a bot, you can access the records. You can search for people's records. The bad news is it's not a whole lot. I mean, it's probably 1,200 or 1,300 counties which are digitized. The rest, you still have to send somebody there. Typically, these people are called court runners. They go to a county court, they talk to the clerk there, and they try to get access And at that point, you're at the mercy of the clerk and how many records they can process with, the staffing level and the funding available for that county court and so on. So there are so many variables, so many factors which can determine how fast and how slow can the information get through. Not to mention that sometimes a lot of the information is missing. Social Security in this case doesn't help. You have your name, date of birth, and address, and guess what? Laws are changing. Some states are redacting the date of birth, some states are also expunging data beyond 7 years or a certain kind of criminal history because many states are passing laws that it's about the right to livelihood and it's about fair chance of employment. So there is that in itself is a huge degree of complexity when it comes to background screening. Not to mention, and we'll talk a little more about that, FCRA, which is more around the reporting and compliance. There are different kinds of criminal searches. You have county records, you have statewide, you have federal criminal records, you have a national sex offender registry, which is kind of criminal or considered deemed to be part of the criminal. And then you have a national criminal database, which is really companies and providers collating all of the data they can from different vendors out there or different sources, different courts, state, federal, and otherwise. And then, if we look if we move along, I think there are in excess of 5,000 universities and colleges in US alone. And so when you look at education verification, there are millions of employers between small, medium, and large, where you might have to deal with the employment verification. The good news again, the whole story is good news, bad news, essentially, is that a lot of the information is available online. The bad news is, it's probably 80-20, 70-30, maybe. So 30% of it, you just don't have a choice. You have to reach out to somebody there, and whether it's at the college, whether it's at a certain employer, and request the verification. And likewise, fortunately, it's a little better scenario here when we look at driving records. Most states are online, perhaps with the exception of one or two, and it's easier and faster to get the record. So, that's really about getting the data. That's really about the sources, where the data comes from. That's really about what kind of checks are done, the criminal and the education, employment verification, driving records, and so on. How are they done? Let's take a peek into that in just a little more detail. At the center of the universe is again the candidate, like you can see here. All of the information which is about you is then used to, procure more information from different sources. And put this a little more technically from a technology perspective. And yes, technology is a huge factor on how this is done and how it can impact the speed and sort of automation and the experience for the stakeholders and so on. So typically CRAs, which are consumer reporting agencies, which is really all background screening providers by definition, they will have some technology or the other. Either they will have invested and developed their own, or they would be licensing somebody else. But at the end of the day, the software behind it, no matter how old, obviously modern platforms have better, experience and much and offer more value and speed, better experience across devices, mobile and otherwise. But having said that, at the end of the day, technology really is connecting, the customer, which is an employer or a landlord or a school or whoever it might be, and the individual, the applicant or the candidate. We rather call everybody an individual. I think we prefer not to use the term applicant or candidate because the individual is more of an identity and it has different personas depending on the environment. And so it really then connects them with the data sources at the end. And so simply put, at the software is the backbone of how background checks are done, and in a process flow, in a very simplistic fashion. The stakeholders, whether it is your employer, whether it is your bank, whether it is your landlord, will provide some information about you, the individual, or they may just request you to provide some information. They may invite you, or they may request you to say, hey, we want to do this, can you provide more data about yourself? You do that. All of this is assimilated, collated in the software portal for different stakeholders. And very dynamically, this information is then disseminated to different data providers, different partners, different vendors who specialize. And it could even be, the employees. It could even be in-house, done by the screening provider, the CRA. But most of the time, in many cases, the information is provided or shared with different vendors, simply because you just don't have the data. You could have a people looking at the code search online, but if you really needed some information from a code which is not online, you have to work with a partner or hire code runners. You have likewise, driving records. You go to a vendor like Samba Safety, and so on. So basically, that information is shared or requested. The candidates or the individual's information, basic data, is shared with the vendors, and they do all the searches, whether it's online or offline. And then as soon as this is done, they would provide it. So as you can see, again, it's all automated. Technology makes a huge difference. It's about the experience. It's about the speed. How soon can the data be collected from the individual, from the state employer or a business, as well as from the partner? How soon can the data be then cleansed? There is, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenges and complexities about why data is, maybe cleansed is not the right word, but, it is reviewed from a compliance perspective, and certain records may have to be removed. So that's maybe using the term cleanse from that perspective. But all along, security for data at rest, data in motion, all of that is very, very critical. So that's how the background checks are done. So moving on, people often ask, why do the checks take a long time? And so by this time, I think at least you have a sense of what are background checks, but more importantly, how are they done? Where is the data coming from? What are the stakeholders? What steps are involved? So in reality, depending on how what kind of checks you're doing and where the individual is, where you are, or whether it's in a certain state in United States, or whether it's in a certain country or different nationality. And today's world is very mobile. We have a lot of people working remotely, people working globally. So depending on who you're working for or where you're living, all of that brings a degree of complexity in terms of how data is collated, and that can take a certain amount of time. Now, once you get it all together, welcome to the web of compliance and regulations, which keep changing all the time. So there are different, countries which have regulations on what data can be reported, stored, made available, so on. If you go to Europe, for example, or Germany, there's very little you can get. There, not only that, there is a certain amount of documentation and process which needs to be followed before you can even request the information. So that's there. So there is, in our terms, it's called consent and authorization. So that's needed, and not just international. I mean, even within the US, there are 50 states. You need, different states may have. Georgia, for example, has come up with a very different consent form. For motor vehicles records, there are different consent forms. So there is a complexity before you can even request the information. But then that's the easy part, perhaps, compared to when the information comes back. And believe it you're dealing with a lot of PII, personally identifiable information, your name, your date of birth, your address, your social security. And guess what? If you have an identity theft, there could be you could there could be a lot of records which show up, whether it's respect to your credit or bankruptcy or criminal record, because your identity was stolen. So there are a lot of things which can happen. So just moving along quickly, this is a reason where all of the reporting and all of the people and the providers are known as CRAs, consumer reporting agencies, because that's what we do. We provide a consumer report on the individual who's a consumer for employment, for tenancy, and so on. So FCRA in at least in US, and there are similar regulations across in different parts of the world, deals with Fair Credit Reporting Act, which means it has a lot to do. It's an act in itself on what can be shown, what can be reported, how recent or the data or the information needs to be, how fresh does it need to be, how much back can you go in history in terms of individual records, and so on and so forth. The state laws keep changing. California, Michigan, New York. I mean, they in US, for example, are states which are constantly changing laws on what can be reported. They are removing date of birth from the searches. So your ability or our ability to match the record which we find with a certain individual becomes even more challenging. And so we have to spend more time and look for different ways to be able to and believe me, a lot of companies, including ourselves, we are looking at using AI to leverage that, because we can then look at places you lived, your date of birth, which we know, and the date of the case, and to collate and look at what your age might be. Were does your address history report, were you there? So there are a lot of ways we can do, but there is complexity which is there on what can be reported, what cannot be reported, and so on. So there are regulations, there are guidelines, there are regulations with respect to the consent, which needs to be in a certain format. And then you have, with respect to a lot of laws around data privacy, GDPR and CCPA, to name a couple. There is a lot more. Every country, every region has them. Not many people understand the distinction between a credit report and a credit score. I think most people won't even know that when you are doing a credit check for employment, you cannot report a credit score. And likewise, when you're doing a credit check for tenancy, most landlords and most property management companies want to look at the credit score, and that is very critical. But having said that, there are now states which are saying, the credit score cannot be reported because it could lead to discrimination, and so on and so forth. So reality is that this is changing very fast. It changes every day. It's difficult to keep up with the regulations. It's important to make sure there is compliance. And God forbid, if we reported something which was false, whether it's a false positive or a false negative, both are equally dangerous. False positive, for example, is perhaps more dangerous because now you're denying somebody an opportunity to get an employment or a house or a loan. But false negative is also equally bad, because now you are clearing somebody who should not be at the workplace, who should not perhaps be at a certain location or given a certain opportunity, as in become a tenant, or as in working in a school with little kids, and so on. So both are equally dangerous. Just moving along, as we spend in the last few minutes, I think we've given a good perspective, good overview, which was the intent for the call today, or the webinar today, was to provide a primer to basically make people aware of what happens in the background screening industry, what is the ho-ha around it, and why does it take so long, and so on and so forth. We look into what's happening in the industry, or what happens. The change is the constant, and everywhere, any industry, more so today with the speed and the technology which we deal with. The need for speed I think it was there yesterday, it was there years ago, and it's becoming very critical tomorrow and future. But then again, pricing and transparency, because this is an area where that's what customers expect, that's what they demand. Change is in the workforce. There is no white collar or blue collar. There is a new collar workforce, which is people who have the experience. They are working remotely. They are working in different parts of the world. They are doing different jobs. Some are doing multiple jobs. Some may not have the skill set, but they have the experience, and they can, they may not have the education, but they have the experience, and so on and so forth. Education may or may not be as critical for certain roles. Um, so there is this, what we call new collar workforce. There is contingent workforce, which is increasing across the globe. There is, freelancing, workforce, which is around the globe. So the change is happening, and it's big. Changing regulations, that's perhaps one of the most complex things which we talk about, whether it's privacy, whether it's data reporting, whatever it is. Regulations change and will continue to change, as we know it. Uh, but I think one of the other things to pay attention to is the changing needs, driven by the change in demographics, driven by the change in how fast the technology is moving. Um, it is the expectation for all stakeholders, for all individuals, where there is not just one thing, which is it's like a bucket, where or a truck where you're mixing concrete, but there is a lot of things which are changing at all times. So this is actually bringing about a new challenge for the industry, bringing about new opportunities. And this is one of the things where it's perhaps driving and ensuring that the technology and modern technology is perhaps even more critical than ever before. And so, which is because the companies need to adapt, and they need to adapt faster than ever before. And so, in conclusion, I think we already live. It's not the new. I think it's already there in this new Insta world. I mean, we have everything around us, which is, for example, Instacart, and Insta work, where instant gratification is somewhat become a norm. We order something, it shows up on our door. We want a job, we go look at LinkedIn or Indeed, and we apply, and it's there. So things are happening online, things are happening faster, and so the world and the future is changing drastically. Where we live in. Um, and so I think the question to ask is, will the traditional screening, hold up? Are we moving to a future where everything is owned by the individual? All our information, all our data, including our credentials, which have been verified, and we just share it with whoever we need to, as we need to, and perhaps they are the people who should be paying, when we share the information, our information which we own. A little, in closing, a little blurb about the team. I've been in the industry for about 10 years. As I said, again, a lot of the learning has been with on the job. There are customers, there are partners, there are other industry gurus who know much more. Fortunate enough to work with Stephanie, who's been the ex-CTO for some of the leading providers, HighRight and First Advantage for a number of years. Ram, who's our co-founder, Christina, who's our marketing lead. And today we have on the call Taser, who's our sales director, and Mike Petrullo, who's also one of our advisors. These are people with so much of passion and, collectively with 100+ years of experience. So just a little bit about the team and adding to our credibility. And again, I think we are right on the money. We're right on the clock. So I want to thank you for everybody for taking the time. Let's open up for Q&A. For five, we can spend a few minutes. So anybody, if you have any questions, otherwise we will share this slide deck we'll share the recording. But yeah, if you have questions, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask. Fire away. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Thanks everybody for joining. We look forward to hearing from you. Love for your feedback, and we will be back with perhaps the next webinar in a month or two. Thank you, and have a good evening or good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.